Imagine a world where sleeping was banned. How would you react? Would you go insane? Would you try and go against the law and sleep anyway? Or would you try and change the rules for the better? Well, all of that was the predicament brought on by the monster known as Can't Sleep. Long, long ago, back in the ancient times, villagers lived prosperous lives as they lived in giant wealthy cities, and within those cities they had every imaginable luxury at their fingertips. And more than that, they were just safe from the environment and other mobs, as their architecture at that time was some of the most advanced ever made, and so because of that they could keep anything that they didn't want away from them. And so it was for both of those reasons that life was great for all. But then there was this one villager, and his name was Carl. Now, Carl loved to live in the city and wear his fancy robes and live this luxurious life, but to him, something just felt missing, as he felt as if there was just more to life than living here in the city without any struggles in life. But what could that missing thing be? Well, he just didn't know. And so on one summer morning, he decided to leave the city and go and find that missing thing in his life. And so it was after that day that he began exploring the world, as he climbed the tallest mountains, dug deep in the darkest caves, foraged through the thickest jungles, and swam in the warmest oceans. But still, after experiencing all the wonders there were to see in this world, he still hadn't found that missing something, and he still had no idea what it was. Well, that was until one thundery night when everything changed. As he was just sailing the vast open oceans when a thunderstorm began to form. It all happened so quickly that he just didn't have the time to sail away, and so he was forced to keep sailing in these very dangerous conditions. But just as he was feeling like he was going to die from the storm, he suddenly felt as if he was being called out by something, and that thing that was calling him was coming from the bottom of the ocean. But he couldn't go down there, so he didn't have the swimming strength to do it. But at the same time, if he ignored these calls, he would never find out what that thing that was calling out to him was. And for all he knows, that thing that was calling out to him could be what he was missing in his life. And so, foolishly, Carl got out of his boat and began attempting to swim downwards. But that might have been a mistake, as it was very difficult to stay alive as thunder struck all around him and he could feel the electric shock from it as it burned him slightly. And the wind from the storm was causing him to move around quite a lot as well, making it very hard to swim, and so because of that, he was beginning to drown. But just as it might have seemed like he was going to die, he could see what was calling out to him, as he could see a small glowing white crystal, and so he continued to swim downwards, and he touched this crystal when he was taken to an underwater city. It was magical. He had never seen anything like this before. Also, there were conduits nearby, which meant he could breathe here without drowning. And so he just stood there for a moment, taking all of this in, as he stared at the detailed columns of quartz and the majestic flooring of the area, before looking up and seeing a giant white castle. He was intrigued, and so he swam over to it to look at it in more detail. And well, it was just amazing, as the extreme levels of details within this castle was unmatched even to the luxurious city that he came from, as every single block in this castle had a purpose here, from the prismarine roofs down to the mushroom walls. Everything was perfect. And so it was because of that he spent the next few hours just swimming around the area, looking in awe at this castle. This must have been what he was missing all along, and he couldn't have been happier, and he wanted to share the news of this amazing castle to everyone. However, by that time, he was starting to get quite tired from all the swimming he had done, and so he just wanted to go to sleep. And so he wandered around looking for a bed, and eventually he did find the entrance inside that castle, and found a bed right in the center, and so it was then that he went to sleep for the night. However, that night would soon change his life forever, as during that night, he had a nightmare. Now, normally this wouldn't be too big of a deal, but this nightmare was particularly vivid, as he could see himself in great detail on a large boat in the middle of the ocean, and he was surrounded by red wolves. That was very strange, but still, he continued watching this nightmare, and he saw that he had just jumped into the lower part of this boat, looking around when the wolves turned savage and began attacking at him, ripping him and his gown apart. He could see himself bleeding to death. He was scared, and so he shot out of bed. It was horrifying to watch, but it was just a nightmare, and so he went back to bed. But when he went back to sleep, the nightmare continued, as the wolves continued to beat him, and he was bleeding all over, and his gown was now completely ruined, and his face was unrecognizable. He wanted to cry inside, but again, it was just a nightmare. It will all be over soon, and so all he has to do is to just smile through it, and he'll be just fine in the morning. But as he was doing that, suddenly all of the wolves just vanished, and then one much larger red wolf came forward.
You have come into my underwater world and awoken me from my slumber. I'm annoyed with that, and so I'm punishing you, as what you may have just witnessed as a nightmare was no nightmare, but instead reality, as my pack of royal wolves have just shredded you apart, and so you will stay in that monstrous form that you are currently in for all of eternity. I hope you like smiling like you were before. Now, I'm not just going to do that, I shall also curse you with a tiresome task you'll be tasked with doing for all of eternity as well. As now you'll have the task of ensuring the permanent waking status of one random being within your world every night. Fail this mission and allow that being to sleep, and well, my underwater world will rise and consume your world, killing everyone within it. So, have fun, and don't wake me up again.
And so Carl woke up in a sweat. That was a very vivid nightmare, but at least it was all over, right? Well, he thought it was, until he got out of bed and looked into a mirror, and he was horrified at what he saw, as he had turned into that disheveled monster. He was scared, as at that moment he realized that the wolf in his dream was telling the truth, as how else could he have turned into this hideous beast? And so because of that, it would also mean that he was now going to be forced to keep random villagers up all night, as he didn't want to risk that wolf rising and consuming the world, which would kill everyone. But how could he get out of this magical castle and to the villagers he needed to keep up to stop all that from happening? Because he didn't see that same white crystal that he took to get here anywhere. But just as he began looking for it, the big red wolf emerged from its throne and lunged at the entity that Carl had become. He was taken back to the overworld, more specifically, his home city. This was bad. That wolf was not lying, as Carl heard his voice in his head.
The villager that dwells in the night is the one that you must keep awake, or else I will rise and I will kill you all.
And then a villager in the far distance of the city began to glow. And so he stealthily made his way over to that villager's house, making sure that no one else saw him. And he told that villager,
"Don't sleep, not for tonight anyway, as if you do, everyone will die."
However, that villager was shocked, as he was not expecting to see a monster suddenly emerging into his house, telling him not to sleep. And so that villager tried running away, thinking that this monster in front of him was probably going to try kill him. However, while running away, he tripped on the bed, which annoyed Carl as he shouted,
"I said don't sleep, so don't go jumping in the bed."
And so he froze for a second before trying to break the window of his house and run away. But then he fell in another bed. Carl was just annoyed with that villager. He told him not to go to bed, yet he still did, even if it was just an accident. And so he shouted again.
You are listening, are you? I told you don't go to bed because you can't sleep or else we're all going to die.
And so he punched that villager in frustration. And to his horror, that killed the villager. And Carl was suddenly teleported away. Meanwhile, in that city, all everyone else heard was just,
You can't sleep.
So they all ran to this loud sound to investigate it, only for them to see the dead remains of one of the villagers. Everyone was either shocked or horrified, as no one had any idea what had happened. But quickly, they just had to move on, as this was probably just a random attack by a zombie or something. But little did they know that Carl was teleported to another city far away, where he was given a new target for the night. And so, just as before, he would run up to that villager and tell them that they
can't sleep for the night.
But just as what had happened before with that first villager, this villager also wouldn't listen to the warnings from Carl and would just jump in their bed, which was probably from fear of seeing a monster in their room. But that didn't matter to Carl. He couldn't risk them going to sleep and the world being destroyed, and so he'd be forced to attack and kill that villager. And so that cycle would repeat every night for millions of years, with Carl being forced to tell the exact same thing to millions of villagers. Now, some villagers would just accept their fate and be willing to die, but others tried to fight back. But one thing stayed the same, as after every villager encountered this entity, none would ever be the same, as they would either be killed from trying to stop him, or they would try staying up for the night, which would cause many of them to go insane. And so because of all of this, over time, legends would spread about Carl and his orders for the villagers not to sleep. And so because of those consistent orders, they named him Can't Sleep. Now, his story was told to many illagers and villagers that soon many began even fearing going to bed, thinking that they could possibly be the next victim of Can't Sleep. But really, the entity of Can't Sleep wasn't evil. He was just trying to stop the world from being destroyed by that evil wolf. And if that meant he had to kill a few illagers or villagers to do that, he was more than willing to go through with that, even if that meant he would be hated by everyone. However, little did everyone know, including the entity of Can't Sleep, that there was a far more deadly threat on the horizon that, if not stopped, will kill everyone, and there's no one saving them this time, as this entity was truly set on destroying the world, not just keeping people awake, saving the world. And you know what? That entity will not stop until everyone is dead. But to learn about him, you'll need to watch this video.